The horror that was Hiroshima and Nagasaki was justified by President Harry Truman because he said it had saved American lives. Over 200,000 people were killed in the dropping of the two atomic bombs, but officials said that even more would have died if the United States had been forced to invade Japan.
This justification has been questioned by two military researchers studying documents from the United States archives. Dr. Arjun Makhijani is one of the researchers who says President Truman's statements are inaccurate. Dr. Makhijani, let's start with the argument that casualties would have been terribly high if the Americans had tried to go into Japan.
Yes, President Truman in his memoirs, which were published, claimed that General Marshall told him it would cost 500,000 American lives to invade and defeat Japan on their home grounds. This number seems to be, on the basis of documents, a vast exaggeration. In June 1945, the Joint Chiefs of Staff explicitly rejected the idea that it would cost 500,000 American lives to defeat Japan in an invasion. They estimated that about 40,000 Americans would be killed in action to defeat Japan, and about 150,000 would be wounded and 3,500 missing.
Now, these documents also suggest that Japan was chosen over Germany as a target. For what reason?
Well, the popular belief is that Japan was chosen as a target because the war in Germany was going to be over before the bombs were ready, whereas we think that this could not have been the main reason. The first discussion of targeting that we found was in May 1943, and at that time they considered both Japan and Germany. They rejected the targeting of Germany because they were afraid if the bomb was a dud that Germany, being ahead in nuclear science, would be better able to make use of the unexploded parts and perhaps build a bomb itself, or wage radioactive warfare against Britain. They were also generally afraid of German retaliation with radioactive warfare, radioactive poisons against British cities, forcing evacuation of places like London.
An early example of the deterrent theory.
That's right. And they felt that Japanese atomic science was not so advanced. And moreover, initially they were cautious even with respect to the Japanese. They had decided at that time that they would not bomb cities like Tokyo. They initially targeted the Japanese fleet at Truk so that if the bomb was a dud, it would sink and be hard to retrieve. But in 1944, when they became more sure that the bomb would work, then they restored the bomb to its original status as a weapon of terror.
Now, you suggest also that if it was a weapon of terror, it was meant not only to terrorize the Japanese, but to put the fear of God into the Soviets as well.
Well, it was to demonstrate U.S. power to the whole world, not only to the Soviet Union. Yes, to the Soviet Union explicitly also. General Groves, who was the executive officer of the Manhattan Project, which built the bomb, testified in 1954 that the project was conducted on the basis that Russia was the enemy, and the president was so informed. For instance, the project personnel were screened for leftist and communist connections before they were hired by the project. But they were not screened for, say, anti-Semitic views or fascist connections when they were hired for the project. So a good part of the effort and concern of the Manhattan Project was in relation to the post-war world and U.S. power with respect to the Soviet Union.
Now, Mr. Makhijani, you must have some personal views of your own why the casualty figures of an invasion of Japan were raised by President Truman, if in fact they were. Why some of the other examples of reasons the bomb had to be dropped were employed. What's your belief about those things?
Well, I think in many ways the decision makers did not really consider the horror of the bombs. They didn't consider the morality of the bomb before it was dropped. But after the horror of the bombings, after the deaths of all the children and the shadows of the bodies that were publicized all over the world, it became very controversial, and the policymakers, instead of saying, well, it was a wartime thing and we made this decision, and being as honest as possible about it, they tried to rationalize the decision away because their decision really was not a seriously considered one and well-considered one.
Thanks very much for talking to us about this.
Thank you very much for having me.